Here we go, the final episode of the Companion series. In this episode, we're covering Governor, Clan Party Leader, and Party Role builds. We'll also pick a few examples of companions that could fill each role. Let's start with Governor builds and one of my favorites, the Stabilizer build. The main goal of this companion is to get a fief back on its feet after being pummeled by our army. The fief will generally be starving, have low loyalty, security, and militia count, and just generally be a liability for our kingdom due to rebellion risks. But with the right governor in place, we can stabilize the fief within days. The build focuses on two things, security and loyalty increase, with loyalty being the higher priority. Keep in mind, every perk in the game with this benefit types are listed, but it's not possible to get everything with a single companion. For example, loyalty can have up to +4 total with all 4 perks enabled. However, Medicine 200 will be a tough skill to level for most companions. If we exclude that, we can still get +3, and they're reasonable for most companions to achieve. The 3 building efficiency perks at the bottom aren't necessary, but they are nice to have. They boost both the daily default and output of certain buildings, which can increase food, taxes, loyalty, and militia if we have those buildings upgraded. Let's test this build out to see how effective it can be using the worst case scenario, a wrong culture fief that has no food due to a prolonged siege. At this current rate, the town will begin to rebel starting in 3 or 4 days from now. We place our governor the next day and check the stats. Now we're at almost +4 loyalty and more to come soon once security increases. Security raises to +4 and we don't have a single troop in the garrison. After only a week of waiting, the town is now in great shape with 78 loyalty and still going up. Now let's see which companions would work for this build. There are only 2 that have skills closely resembling our build, Tracker and the Khazate version of Ragged. Both of these wanderers have melee and ranged combat skills leveled up, as well as attribute points into Vigor and Control. A few focus points will need to be spent in Leadership and Roguery to pick up those perks, and there will need to be some grinding to level up the combat skills a bit higher, but this build is definitely worth it. I'm going to include Nobles in this section. Nobles can't respect the perks, and you'll be rolling the dice to see if they have the right perks selected. When this is patched, anyone on the list will be able to fulfill this role. The next governor build will be short for 2 reasons. There are only 3 perks needed, and more importantly, it's not currently working. However, when Tailworlds does fix these perks, it will be an incredibly important governor to have. With these 3, the escape chance is reduced by 95% for prisoners in our dungeon, meaning we can hang on to them for a very long time. For the testing, I placed 10 prisoners into the dungeon, and after a full year, in-game, 8 out of 10 had escaped captivity. If the escape chance for 1 year is actually 80%, and we reduce this amount by 95%, then the escape chance reduces to 4% total. This means if we have 100 prisoners captured, only 4 would escape on average over the course of a full year, and it only takes 3 perks to do it. The list of potential companions for this build is big, with the priority being the top half with 4 endurance points. Roguery and engineering only need a single focus point to hit their perks, so it shouldn't be a challenge. I'm not including a noble list here because all nobles have writing skill and can fit the role nicely, assuming they have the correct perks. If you're struggling to make your fiefs profitable, the next governor build is for you. The main focus here is maximum prosperity gain, which forms the basis for a fief's tax income. Only 3 of these perks give a flat increase per day, while the others give bonuses for certain actions like completing a building. There are also 3 perks that increase hearth growth for attached villages. While this isn't directly an increase in prosperity, increasing the level of attached villages will result in increased food production. And as you know, any excess food that isn't used up or being stored in the granary will convert into prosperity. A quick note before we move on to testing. Level 150 medicine has a tough choice to make, so I included both perks. One increases prosperity by 1, and the other increases hearth growth by 20%. I tend to lean towards hearth growth, but either would be a good pick here. For the testing, we start with a town that has negative 0.2 prosperity growth and 1.6 village hearth growth with irrigation daily default turned on. After placing the governor, the hearth growth increases to 2.4 per day, and prosperity up to 2.55 per day. Once the villages upgrade to 600 hearths or higher, prosperity will grow even faster and we'll be able to switch the daily default to housing, granting another +1 prosperity to growth. Our approach here is a bit different since there are no companions that come with high skill in all 3 intelligence skills. However, we can train one up by taking a low starting level character and leveling them up. Most late game companions will have no problem reaching level 24, which gives us 4 attribute points to place. I recommend pumping everything into intelligence because of how how slow medicine is to level up. These companions also make good clan party leaders, so they can be used for that role until the good perks are attained. When it comes to nobles, we are again looking for under 12, so we can pick up extra attribute points. There are only females available, and only Hafisa comes with 4 intelligence, with everyone else having 3. And since these nobles are low level, we will be able to assign the correct perks. One thing we should do before trying to max out prosperity in a town is upgrading the important buildings. Food and militia production, tax and prosperity increases, and most importantly, loyalty. To get to this point faster, we need to hire and train a governor that focuses on building speed increase perks. The list isn't too big, and most perks are part of the intelligence category again, so we can focus the same steps as the previous build. For level 75 engineering, I included both perks. One focuses on castles, and the other focuses on towns. You can always respec your companion depending on which fief you're working on at that moment. With this build, we can achieve upwards of 22% for any building type, all the way up to 82% faster for specific types. Let's look at an example. This town has a base construction of 29. Certainly not ideal for building anything. It'll take 551 days to complete the walls, 103 for the training fields, all the way down the list with the fastest building taking 34 days to complete. If we put a few dinars in the reserves and assign our governor, we'll see a dramatic change in time to complete. The walls are down to 69 days. Training fields, 15 days, and again all the way down to 5 days for the granary. This is an increase of anywhere from 6 to 10 times faster for any building. Keep in mind, some of the benefit is coming directly from the engineering skill, but the perks really ramp up the benefits as well. The companion list will be the exact same as the previous build, but with one difference. I also included social attribute into the mix. One of the 30% increased building speed perks is locked behind trade, so we will need to level that up. You could also skip that and just funnel everything into intelligence, engineering, and Steward, since both these skills will increase the efficiency of the fief and avoid having to send our companion on a caravan for 10 years. And again, the list for nobles is the same as the previous, with a few having some trade skill to start with at least. Let's say we have our stabilized fief with all buildings upgraded and the prosperity starting to top out around 10,000 or higher. We should look to put a permanent governor in place that focuses exclusively on perks that increase our fief's income. Looking at the list, there are 4 types, but only 2 are really worth talking about: tax increases and tariff increase. We can get at least 17.5% more tax from the 3 flat increase perks, and depending on our final level, we can get as much as 65% more at level 330. While that may be unrealistic for a companion, the high 200s or even the low 300s are definitely possible, adding another 50% or more on top. I'm not usually a big fan of tariffs, but if our town does enough trading, then an extra 20% can really add up. The other perks are nice to have, but I wouldn't really go out of my way to level them up. Let's see what our build can do. The base income for this town is 2,000 without a governor, which is barely enough to afford a garrison and nothing else. As soon as we place our governor, the income shoots up to 3,300 dinars, which is a huge increase. I've seen fiefs above 10,000 prosperity before that could easily exceed 10,000 dinars per day with the right governor in place. When it comes to companions, we see again the same list from before. These companions are so powerful due to their ability to be leveled up however we choose. Aside from reaching 275 Steward, we need to make sure we put 2 focus points into scouting. For bow, it's a tough call. Putting 5 points into control will get us above 250 bow, but if we put those same points into intelligence, we can increase tax revenue for the final perk by even more. If somehow we manage to max out intelligence, then control should be the next goal. I'm sure you can tell by now what I'll say about nobles. Any of these are fine, and the same advice for companions should be followed here. I can already hear the grumblings in the comments.
But Strat, how are we supposed to get a fief to late game? I can't even hold it for a few days after taking it.
Well, don't you worry. I've saved the best 2 builds for last. Let's start with the cheaper garrison. The biggest appeal of having a large garrison is actually not to defend the fief during a siege, because it's very easy and quick to starve them out and remove them from the battle entirely, but instead to avoid being sieged down in the first place. The AI determines if a fief is worth being sieged down based on how many troops and how strong those troops are that are defending it. It goes without saying, more troops and stronger troops are better. Looking at this list, I want to point something out. Some perk descriptions will tell you that they reduce garrison wages, but through testing, some worked only with towns, others only with castle. I included which is which here in the parentheses, so be sure to keep that in mind. Adding up all the bonuses, we can decrease garrison wages in towns by 55% for infantry, by 85% for mounted troops. Now, if we were to use the empire culture for our main character, we can increase increase these numbers by a further 20%, resulting in earning a small wage for a cavalry even. Let's look at an example. This garrison of 320 units cost 1,800 dinars per day without a governor. By placing the governor, this number reduces to less than half, under 800 per day. While there are quite a few companions that could fill this role, I narrowed it down some to reduce the amount of grinding necessary to get there. Both the tracker and the Khazate Ragged would work well, only needing to put focus points into leadership and steward. Loud and silent would also work, but would need some points into bow and crossbow. As always, there's a huge list of nobles that would work here, but without being able to respec their perks, it's hard to recommend anything until that's fixed. And now for the final governor build, the Siege Defense Master. The primary focus of this build is to increase the defensive capabilities of the fief, mostly through militia boosts. We can also reduce food consumption, allowing garrisons to survive a little bit longer, but the most reliable defense is through militia. Taking all of the militia increased perks will yield an extra 4.5 per day and another +2 per day while under siege. And if we get leadership 150, some of our militia troops will spawn as tier 3 veterans, which are pretty good troops. In the testing, we see militia for this town cap out at around 475. This is a pretty high number, but we can do much better. Adding in our governor, we see the daily balance increase to +6. Let's wait a few weeks to see how high we can top out at. Unfortunately, a couple days into the test, and our governor decided to take a stroll to another town, no longer boosting our fief. This is a known bug in 1.8 and should be fixed with the next hotfix. However, we can estimate the max militia for this town to be around 40 militia units for every +1, so around 700 in total. The enemy would need many more troops than that to win a siege. Just for reference, our 522 militia were able to kill off 1,100 enemy troops. There are a few companions that would work for this build, although if you can find a Khazate Ragged or a tracker, then you'll save yourself a bit of farming. If your campaign didn't spawn these two, then just be prepared to spend some time building this companion up. It's definitely worth it though. The noble list is long, but my preference would be to take a lower level and build them up manually. This negates the issue of having wrong perks. Now let's move on to the most useful topic, main party roles. We will look at each of the four in detail: scouting, steward, surgeon, and engineer. Let's start with scouting. It's the only skill in the cunning group that can be used by our main party. The majority of scouting perks we prioritize are movement speed, since that is vital to staying alive and catching the enemy out of position. Level 75 has both perks selected, as it will depend heavily on what our army composition is. If we have mostly foot troops, then forest kin is a better choice. Otherwise, take Desert Born. One final thought before we move on. Some perks are taken specifically for companion scouts. If we were to take scouting on with our main character, the perk choice would be different. Level 225 is a perfect example. Both perks have one scout and one party leader perk. Unfortunately, a scout companion will not be able to use party leader perks for our main party, making Vantage Point a bit more useful than Keen Sight. If our main character were to take the scouting role, Keen Sight would be the pick 100% of the time, no questions asked. We have a healthy list of candidates that would make for a good scouting companion. My personal preference here is to go with the lower level wanderers, as they will have more flexibility with how we choose to level them. The healer or Batanian wanderer are perfect examples, both being below level 12. By the time they reach 24 for the late game, they will have at least 7 points into cunning, which is enough to reach the final perk. Level 12 and above may or may not reach level 7, as attribute points have some RNG with how many they spawn with. Nobles require a different approach. There isn't a single noble in the game with scouting skill, so we would have to build one up from scratch. The best way to do this is to pick someone with at least 3 cunning and starting level below 12. As with the wanderer, the goal here is to pump all available attribute points into cunning and at least get to 7. There are 8 possible nobles, all of which are female. Personally, I would rather have a wanderer take the scouting role, but it's possible with a noble. For the final section, we will look at all 3 intelligence roles at the same time, since they will follow the same pattern for companion selection. The steward perks should look something like this. We prioritize wage reduction perks over all else, and the most important one being level 275. Level 100 efficient campaigner reduces our party's wages by 25% when in an army, which can be done as early as clan tier 2 and becoming a vassal. We can start a companion party, donate troops to them, call the party into our army, take the troops back, and reap the rewards. And there's no added cost from the extra party, since our companion party will remain empty. With a high enough steward skill, we can reduce party wages to 0 or even negative, giving us an income from our own troops. The surgeon perks aren't incredibly important for a companion, with the vast majority of them giving a tiny increase in healing rate. The 225 cheat death is quite nice though, reducing companion death in battle from 2% to 1%. However, the medicine skill itself provides some really nice bonuses to healing rate and injury rate. In the late game, having a high medicine skill means we can continue pushing after a battle instead of having to stop and recruit new units to recover the losses. Getting to 275 is probably not going to happen on a companion. It's hard enough to do as a main character with 10 intelligence. Engineering is similar to medicine in that the perks are rubbish, but also similar to roguery in that the skill itself does almost nothing. Having an engineer is a nice to have, definitely not a need to have. Also note that the only good perk, level 75 military planner, was nerfed in 1.8 and now only gives 25% ammo instead of 50%. The strongest reason to train engineering is for a governor's build speed increase. While higher engineering skill does speed up siege engine construction slightly, it's actually better to have more units as a large army builds faster than a small army. Now let's look at which companions can be used to fill these party roles. I've compiled as wide a list as possible since we won't get all of these at the same time, but we'll often need 3 to 7 per campaign depending on our main character's build. Once again, my preference is to take anything under level 12 since we can put the points where we need them to be. Also, you can ignore the Steward, medicine, and engineering skills when picking for a party role. The most important thing is intelligence points. Getting 5 focus points to max out a skill is not challenging, but getting to 7 or higher intelligence is the challenge. I often find myself hiring a surgeon to become my party's steward or engineer. Looking at the list of nobles, we can follow the same trend. The preference is lower starting levels so we can build them up as we see fit. We won't have to worry about respec for perks, and we can reach 8 or even 9 intelligence. I personally wouldn't touch anything over level 15 with a preference for somebody under level 12. Hafisa again strikes me as particularly good, being level 11 and having 4 intelligence. At level 24, she will have 8 intelligence, which will give our party a huge advantage in whatever role she takes on. But don't waste her in engineering, please. Now let's test these builds out. We start by having our main character taking all roles with no skill in each category. Our daily wage is 17,000. Food consumption just over 50 per day, and movement speed at 2, with 1,000 units in our army. We find a big battle to fight, taking note of the casualty rate without a good surgeon. In this case, we have 150 dead to 141 injured, or close to a 1-to-1 ratio. Might as well test a siege while we're at it, trying to outbuild the enemy ballista with our own. There doesn't seem to be a chance, but switching to trebuchet easily wins the day. Now let's appoint our party roles to see what difference it can make. Our party wages are down 10,000 dinars per day, only 7,600 now. Food consumption is cut in half to 25 per day. Movement speed still pretty slow, but up by 0.24 from the perks. With 1,000 units, the difference is minute, but with the small party, the scouting perks make a huge difference. We fight another massive battle, but this time 104 are dead and 444 injured for a ratio of 4.2 injuries per death, or more than 4 times higher. It's so nice keeping our high tier units alive. This time we start the siege off with a pre-built ballista, and our siege engines do way more damage. We easily take the initiative in the siege duel using ballista only, but again, we could have easily just put trebuchet in reserve and had the same results, taking only a day or so longer. Last but not least, let's cover the clan party leaders. These companions are unique in that they need to fulfill all 4 party roles by themselves. The builds are nearly identical to what we covered in the main party roles, but will differ some with companion selection. The least important role for party leader is scout. I know you're probably thinking engineering, but hear me out. Scouting is mostly useless in the late game when we have massive armies, which we certainly will be using. Intelligence, however, covers 3 different skills, so a high intelligence will allow for a higher cap at all 3 of these. It's simply the best bang for your buck when it comes to a party leader. One thing to note, steward and medicine skills are limited to the troops within that specific party. So if our main steward has 75% wage reduction, but our clan parties have no wage reduction perks, then we will still be paying a significant amount of money for our army in general. However, if everyone has 75% wage reduction perks, then our entire clan army will be much cheaper to field. The same goes for surgeon. If our clan party leaders have no medicine skill, then the units in their party will die at a much higher rate in battle, even if our main party has a high medicine skill. When selecting for this role, the process is the exact same as for the main party intelligence roles. We want to take a low-level companion and build them up manually. Personally, I prefer to put focus points into steward first, then medicine, then either scouting or engineering. Let's finish off with some quick tests to show the power of having strong party leaders. We have 2 companions. One is totally useless with 0 skills across the board, and one with the best perks and a high intelligence. troops. If we move all troops to our main party, wages increase to 1711. Moving them over to the low-level companion, the wages remain high at 1749. But once we move them to the good companion, wages decrease to 380, an incredible feat. Now let's give both companions an equal number of foot troops and check their movement speed. The low-level companion is moving at 3.9 and the higher tier at 4.8, which is a huge difference. But let's not forget, scouting should be leveled up last compared to the intelligence skills. Now let's test a battle with all the troops, with the bad party leader, and compare it with our prodigy companion. The first battle was close, but ultimately resulted in a loss and 179 killed, 107 injured, which is close to a 2-to-1 ratio. However, if we move the troops over to the good companion, we see a big difference. 31 dead and 97 injured, and the battle was won. I'll be doing another video in the near future talking about my personal thoughts on which companions and spouses are the best, as well as how to use the Notion database to get the most out of it. Thanks for watching this series. Don't forget to tickle that like button, and I'll see you on the next one. Let's move on to arguably the most useful topic. Alright, I'm deleting that because I can't say that. And there's no added benefit.